Who in our new society is trying to save us in this way? We. You know, this is one of the troubles with America at present, that we keep saying, we need a leader. Well, it has been said, and I think very accurately, that nations get the government they deserve. Your leader, whoever he is, a president, a governor, president of a university, can only go as far as the people whom he's leading will make it possible to go. You know, Franklin D. Roosevelt used to watch the polls very carefully, and when he had 60% of the polls, he moved. And he moved perfectly efficiently. And then he'd talk a little more and make some more fireside chats and think up some more nice complicated arrangements like Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies. That was a very great invention, and we've made lots since then. We have negative income taxes, and we have dropouts, which means that people we never wanted to go to school now ought to, and things like that. But this is a country where the leadership will only go beyond what the people want. And confrontations are very dramatic ways of stirring things up and bringing things to people's attention, but then we have to get to work. And I think that's the difference between previous periods and the present period, that the young voters are going to get to work. They're not all going to go to New Hampshire to get arthritic farmers out of bed for McCarthy, which was a very useful thing to do once, but isn't a continual tactic that's going to work very well. The question was that I talked about many values in our society that need to be changed, and I mentioned the family, and what precisely did I mean? See, I think we've shrunk the family and isolated the family too much. That very few societies have ever asked two young people, inexperienced in every way, to become a completely autonomous unit, looking after their children and themselves in every possible way. Now, the Eskimos did it occasionally. Occasionally, one family would go off and live by themselves until they got bored, and then they'd go and see people. But this is terribly, terribly rare. And the Eskimos were very self-sufficient. They could build a house out of snow, and they could make a pickaxe out of ice, and they could work wherever they were. We've taken young families, we put every weight on them, we give them no help of any kind, and so we have made the kind of people who are what my previous speakers called consumer-minded. That is, people who feel that they're living in a big system and that all they can do is to go along with it and get the best they can out of it, because they've given so many hostages to fate and there's nobody to help them. Each young family goes down by itself now. And what we need to do is to envelop the family with more people to be of some use to it. Take all the people that aren't married at the moment, and there ought to be a lot more of them. Take the older people that we're now shoving away in Florida, bring them back and put them together so that each young family had some protection. We're not talking about destroying the family, we're talking about giving it enough strength so it can survive. Now, again, you say again that this is a great change in values, but this is the way people lived 75 years ago. They had neighbors that they knew. They had relatives that were somewhere near. They weren't 2,000 miles from anybody, all alone among people that they didn't know. And a lot of these things do not mean new values. They simply mean new ways of doing things that we think we're doing now, but aren't doing very successfully. Did you hear that? Did you hear it?
What effect do you think that the use of drugs will have in the future?
Well, I don't think the use of drugs hasn't had very much effect now. It's the laws against the drugs that have had an effect, you know. We just had a repetition of the Volstead Act, and our inability to learn is cosmic, you know. And very discouraging, you know, because we had a demonstration that enough people to swing a majority in this country disapproved of anybody ever being allowed to drink any spirituous liquors. And they passed a law that involved everybody in the country and turned masses of people into drunkards and lawbreakers who previously hadn't drunk at all. And after we had gangsters and murder and corruption running all over the whole country and people dying of bathtub gin, which they did generously, the same people, some of them, looked at the effects and decided the effects were worse. And although they still didn't believe in the demon rum, they believed less in the Volstead Act. And so they repealed it. But they didn't repeal all the damage that was done. We've never restored as much of a respect for law as we had before. And this is the same thing that's happened now. And by passing laws that one part of the population was imposing on another, because the laws about marijuana were mainly passed against jazz musicians. And it was long before this was affecting suburbs. And we passed a law which then created a lot of law breaking and created a vacuum of lawfulness, if you like, a place where everybody was coming in contact with lawbreakers. And so we've temporarily inundated ourselves with a lot of law breaking. I think that probably we're going to go on in the future experimenting, that everybody hopes that someday we will produce a perfectly harmless drug with which you can drive a car at least 30 miles an hour without injuring anyone, have only beautiful visions, never produce a psychosis, have no side effects, be very good for your spirituality and not annoy other people. We haven't done this yet, but it's in line with our present kind of experimentation. We probably will. But I don't think that drugs are an essential element in the future. I think the way we handle them is an important element in the future. And just for the record, about this 16-year-old pot using, what I said was that if we believed in 18-year-olds drinking, then maybe, which most people don't, then we might believe in 16-year-olds smoking pot because it's far less dangerous. I was not advocating 16-year-olds smoking pot. I do advocate repealing the laws that are making criminals of half the country now, of 20 million people. Oh, that's the latest record. And 20 million people who are subject, if caught with a little bit of pot, to up to 30 years in jail. Now, this produces a degree of blackmail and a degree of wreckage of careers that is frightful. And a great many parents are beginning to realize that their present attitudes mean that their children may never have a career in this country at all if this goes on. Never hold a civil service job, never work for the federal government, never go to medical school, never go to law school, because we've created this particular situation. Anybody else want to ask a last question? Did you hear that? I didn't. You have to say it again, I guess. What do I think of Telfer's concept of future shock? It's perfectly good. It was good for an article. Um, it's a bright idea, and it dramatized the fact that we are, all of us, moving back and forth with our attempt to understand the prognostications about the future with which we're being showered. And from that point of view, it was useful. I don't agree with many of his threats or his solutions.